Hello, my name's Les Litwin. I'm the Sales Director of Antrica. Today I wanted to do a quick start guide for the ANT-2700. This is an HD-SDI decoder. So before we get into the details, I just wanted to give you some information. So the first thing is the default IP address is 192.168.1.160, and depending on the firmware version that you've got, there will be a login page, and if you do have that login page, then the default username and password is admin. Okay, without further ado, let's have a look at the product itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is log into the web page, which is 192.168.1.160. And here you can see it's asking me for the username and the password, admin. Save that. So this is the web interface to the 2700, and in the bottom right hand corner you can see the monitor. So I've got a webcam pointed at the monitor, and below the monitor is the 2700 decoder with its HD-SDI connected to this HD-SDI monitor. And as you can see, it's displaying an image because we have a camera, which I'll just pick up and show you. This camera here is actually being pointed at that monitor and the product, just so that you've got something to look at. Okay, so the first page of the web interface is called the status page, and if you click on it, there's not much information there. The information that you can see is it says split mode 1 by 1. This is because we can choose one of three display modes. So we can have 1 by 1, we can have 1 by 2, so two videos side by side with a black box above and below it, depending on the aspect ratio, and then a quad, which is a 2 by 2, so 4 images. So this decoder can decode 1, 2, or 4 cameras, or 3 cameras, and it can display those in a number of ways as I just described. The status page will show you the RTSP or whatever URL you're using, HTTP, which is being decoded by this decoder. So in this case, we've only got one stream being decoded, and we're in 1 by 1 mode. So we're only showing one input. Excuse me. Okay, so the next page that we're going to get to is the network page. This page is relatively simple. You can choose between DHCP or fixed IP address. In this case, we're in fixed IP mode, and as I say, the default fixed IP is 192.168.1.160. The net mask and gateway, obviously these are characteristics that you can change depending on your particular network configuration. On every single web page there's an apply button. Effectively, any changes you make are only applied when that apply button is pressed. Okay, moving on to the third section. This is called the decode section, and this is where we set up all of the parameters for both the display output and the URLs for decoding. So the top box decides what resolution you wish to output through the HD-SDI interface. So as you can see, the maximum is 1080p 60, which is 3GHD-SDI, and the minimum is 720 by 480. And in these cases, at the lower ends and indeed in the mid-range, you have interlaced or progressive. We would always recommend progressive because you're decoding a progressive signal, and you would ideally wish to display it as a progressive signal. Otherwise you're going to get all sorts of other artifacts or issues happening with the conversion from progressive to interlaced. Now, network caching is something that applies when you have a jittery signal coming into the decoder. This is usually the case when you are trying to decode a stream coming over the internet, and you will find that the decoder may not be stable because its buffer is set to the minimum to get the lowest latency. So unfortunately you have to increase the network buffer, or the network caching in this case, and this will increase the latency, but it will stabilize the video. This is very similar to VLC player, which has 1000 milliseconds of buffer as a standard, and you can reduce this to 200 or 300 milliseconds. The next two sections, MPTS and audio track, I'm going to skip because this is something for another video in more detail, and also I'm going to skip the soft decode. The most important thing is now down here, which is where we set up our various URLs for decoding. So first of all, we want to turn private protocol off. We want to choose a URL instead of file. If you choose file, then you will be pointing the decoder at a file location where it will basically play from that file location. If you're streaming live, then you would pick URL. The next thing you choose is the display mode. You can choose 1x1, 1x2 or 2x2. If I select 2x2, I've got 4 locations to put URLs, and if I click set, you will see on the monitor in the bottom right hand corner that the display is only showing 1 image because I have 3 gaps in here. So in the input 1, this is where you input the full RTSP URL. Now this particular camera is authenticated, so the username and password are part of the URL, otherwise the decoder will not decode it. If you use VLC to decode this, it usually brings a pop-up and it asks you to enter the username and password if it is not in the URL. And this is the complete URL for the RTSP. In this case it's the IP address of the camera, port 554, and then /1/1. Some cameras have /stream, /video1, all RTSP URLs are slightly different. So you would then populate the other 3 inputs with different sources and then click set, and that basically defines the display, which you can see in the bottom right hand corner. I'm going to put this back to 1x1 mode, and there you go, full screen. Now there's one area that's missing here, which I need to go back, unfortunately, again to this mode. If I go into 2x2, it actually asks me which audio output source do you wish to decode. So you're only allowed to decode 1 audio channel, but you can decode 4 video channels. So you may wish to decode the audio from channel 1 and then have channels 2, 3 and 4 as just pure video. Okay, we won't save that, so that basically won't save and it will stay in 1x1 mode. There are 2 other areas here. If you look on the top, you've got open protocol video, and then you've got peer-to-peer video, which again I'm going to skip for now, and SRT. SRT is secure reliable transport, and if your encoded source is using SRT, you can set up the SRT characteristics in this particular section for the decoder. Okay, now we move to system. System settings are relatively straightforward. You've got the ability to reset or reboot the encoder. If you click reset, you will basically put it back to its factory defaults and lose all of your settings. If you reboot, it will just reboot. You can change the password from admin. At the moment it's username admin and password admin. The username always stays as admin. The password can be changed. Update is where you would upgrade the firmware should you wish to do so or need to do so. The version tells you which firmware is already installed, and then timing reboot allows you to set an interval in hours when the decoder will automatically reboot itself. Now this is quite important because sometimes when you've got differences in timestamps between the stream and the decoder, you can find that there is a bit of a lag builds up, and the way to get rid of that is to reconnect to the stream. In this particular case, the decoder just does a soft reboot, and that forces the decoder to reconnect to the stream, and that gets rid of any of these issues that you might be facing. So that's the purpose of having that there. Okay, finally, PTZ. PTZ is a feature where you can connect an RS485 PTZ joystick controller to the decoder, and you can control a remote camera which has the PTZ functionality. Here you would set up the protocol, the baud rate, and so on and so forth. Now this is actually using the ONVIV protocol to control the camera, because RTSP on its own does not support two-way data communications. So effectively, when you're sending these commands, you're actually sending them as ONVIV commands. So that's it. That's the ANT-2700. This is the video quick start guide for it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email support@antrica.com.